Looks like morning in your eyes, but the clock's held 9:15 for sunrise.
Hello, hello, everybody. I'm very happy that you are enjoying the company of all the guests. That was my purpose, of course, but we are going to start. So I must apologize that I must interrupt you for a little bit. Thank you very much. So, good evening, everybody. My close colleagues, Elisa and Leah and I, as well as the board of directors, are very happy that you are so numerous to have answered our invitation to the 30th anniversary of our organization and to put this date and time in your agenda. You're all friends, collaborators of Human Rights Without Frontiers, and a number of you are personal friends who have taken part in exciting projects in the defense of challenging causes and sometimes as well dangerous missions. Throughout the last 30 years, each of you has contributed in one way or another at different times to the development of Human Rights Without Frontiers. I think of a few of them that are here. I think of Danielle, for example, who found the offices where we are now based. She negotiated successfully, she's there at the back, the acquisition of that wonderful place with a wonderful location, but also before, when we were based in Uccle or in the center of Brussels, near the Belgian Parliament. I also think of André, who was our guide in Greece when in the 1990s we visited military prisons in Greece. I also think of Nadia, who accompanied me in dangerous missions in Iraq and in Nepal. Kanku, who is not here today, but I really want to mention his name because he was the first one to create our website, and he's now running our section in the United States. Pierre, he is a member of our board of directors. About 15 years ago, he put the issue of North Korea on our agenda as a priority, and well, since then, unfortunately, there has not been any solution, but maybe with Trump there will be one, who knows, and Kim Jong-un, of course. Alfias, well, I don't see him here. Well, okay. Alfias was also a member, first an intern, and then he became a member of our staff, and we pushed him to try to get a position in the European Parliament, so he was in the intergroup on religious freedom. Now he's intergroup against xenophobia, racism, etc. I also think of Patricia and Regis, who are here, who involved us in the protection and the defense of the rights of people belonging to, affiliated to new religious movements. Hans here is also taking care of our database of prisoners. Fabrice, Charles, Petrus, members of the board, and many others. Bjorn, I'm happy that he is here as well. Every time he can promote our organization at the Parliament, he does it, and I'm very thankful to him for that. I could thank many other people who are here, but I cannot give all the names. But they can be sure that they are as close to my heart as those that I have mentioned before. But I also think of quite a number of interns. Some have become members of our staff, Leah, Elisa, the last ones, but many others before as well. I had made some calculation a few days ago. I think in the 30 years we had more than 120 interns coming from everywhere around the world. They learned from us, but I also learned a lot from them. You know, it's not in one direction that we have relationship with the people who work for us or we work with. For example, Anita is now the human rights officer at the OSCE in Warsaw. Another one, Peter Buda, was in Hungary the advisor of the Prime Minister quite a number of years ago. Another one is a famous lawyer in Japan When he was in Belgium during his internship, he fell in love with the songs of Jacques Brel, with the French language, and he's now absolutely, perfectly bilingual, and his name is never mentioned in the Le Guide Michelin as a Japanese lawyer who is bilingual that can be contacted by any Japanese being in trouble in Europe. So I think that quite a number of people had a brilliant, and still have a brilliant career, not because of us, but because they were talented, and we are happy to stay in contact with them. We also have here a few refugees who fled from China because of their affiliation to the Church of Almighty God, a movement that is as heavily persecuted as the Falun Gong movement, which is well known in that country, and we try to help them to get the status of refugees in a number of European countries. And next week we will have a conference at the European Parliament on that issue, persecution, religious persecution in China and the right to asylum in the European countries. We also have collaborators in many other countries, in South Korea, in Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Germany. I cannot list them all. They would have liked to join us, but coming by plane for just a reception is a bit expensive. But they sent us messages of congratulation. In the past, we didn't celebrate the 10th anniversary of the organization, nor the 20th, nor the 25th, despite the regrets of some of them. I think of Bjorn, who pushed me 5 years ago to celebrate the 25th anniversary of our organization. I didn't forget what he told me, but it took me 5 years to finally decide to organize it, because we were always busy giving the priority to the defense of people, of individuals, and so spending our time and energy to help those people, minorities that are victims of discrimination, intolerance, and also for the defense of democracy, the rule of law, and human rights, as we always say. But sometimes it's necessary to stop and to make a pause and to look back at our past, to thank all those who have contributed to the growth and the good health of the organization, and to celebrate together. And also for you to meet maybe after a few years if you lost sight from each other. So thank you for sharing this time with us tonight. And I will now give the floor to Susa Anna Ferenczi, who will be the Master of Ceremony for the next parts of this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. A warm welcome to all of you. It is my pleasure to be the master of the ceremony at tonight's celebration. We celebrate 30 years of Human Rights Without Frontiers, and it is even more so my pleasure to be here because out of those 30 years, I've had the honor to work with Human Rights Without Frontiers, so for 10 years, in my capacity as advisor to a member of the European Parliament who is from Hungary, Laszlo Tökés, Vice Chair of the Human Rights Committee, and we have benefited from the expertise of the organization, from building up a very good working relationship, and this is also a moment for me to say thank you for that and to wish you good luck in the future with that. And because Mr. Tökés is not able to be with us tonight, I have a message that I would like to read. That is, he insisted that I shared a few thoughts that he would have shared with you had he been here. So this message goes as follows. It is my pleasure to congratulate 30 years of tireless and valuable activity of Human Rights Without Frontiers in the field of human rights around the world. I have had the honor to collaborate with President Willy Fautré since 2008, when I started my first mandate in the European Parliament. Back then, the European scene in this field was yet unknown to us on a European level. Us newly elected members and newly joined member states of the EU. However, our struggle for our own human rights and for the cause of human rights was not new. Having lived under communism, under Ceausescu's brutal dictatorship in Romania, our own existence as a Hungarian minority community in Transylvania, Romania, was in danger. Our fundamental freedoms were practically non-existent, not allowed to use our mother tongue, and not allowed to freely practice our religion, threatened by assimilation into one great nation. When we finally brought down this totalitarian regime in 1989, democracy returned to Central Eastern Europe, and we finally joined the EU in 2007. Having served as a member in the EP, as member and vice chair of the Human Rights Committee since the beginning, I had always found inspiration in the struggle my people had led against oppression. I equally found inspiration in working together with other countries with similar experiences. But most importantly, it is members of civil society, NGOs like Human Rights Without Frontiers, that have truly inspired my work as a member following human rights violations around the world. In numerous events, Human Rights Without Frontiers and my office jointly spoke up against violations in North Korea, China, Burma, but also Azerbaijan and other countries where human rights remain at great risk. The expertise of the organization remains invaluable, and Willy's personal dedication even more so. I want to thank him for his commitment to help those in need and wish him all the best in all his future efforts for the cause.
Thank you.
And after this message, I will now proceed to the program. First, we will show you two video messages by two prominent human rights advocates who have been working with Human Rights Without Frontiers for many, many years, but today, unfortunately, they cannot be with us. So the first message is from Professor Massimo Introvigne, an Italian lawyer, scholar in religious studies and many other areas of expertise, but also former special representative of the OSCE against racism, xenophobia, discrimination against Christians, and members of other religions. So let's watch the video.
I have met Human Rights Without Frontiers and Willy Fautré more than 30 years ago, when we started defending unpopular groups, some labeled as cults, in many countries of the world, including the European Parliament, the US Senate, and parliaments of the new democracies that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. These were difficult times where those opposed to cults had a very loud voice. I believe in many years of work, organizations like Human Rights Without Frontiers really made a difference. I served in 2011 as the representative for combating racism, xenophobia, and religious intolerance at the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and I served between 2012 and 2015 as president of the Italian Observatory of Religious Freedom, established by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And almost every day I was reading the reports of Human Rights Without Frontiers, and almost every month I was consulting with Willy Fautré. And that really made a difference. I believe in looking back to so many years of activity of Human Rights Without Frontiers, we can say that the world is better. Yes, there is still persecution in totalitarian states. Yes, there is still intolerance and discrimination, even in our Europe. But thanks to the works of people like Willy Fautré, reliable information is available. And even highly discriminated groups such as Jehovah's Witnesses or Church Scientology or the Church of Almighty God sometimes may be described in proper terms, and news about their discrimination and persecution are immediately spread all over the world. And I believe for all this we should be very grateful to Willy Fautré and Human Rights Without Frontiers, and we should celebrate their activity and hope and wish that it will continue for long years, as this activity not only gives, in a time of fake news, reliable information, but it saves human lives.
Hello, my name is Rhodes, and I'm very happy to be able to send my greetings to Human Rights Without Frontiers and Willy Fautré on this occasion of their 30th anniversary. I've known Willy and Human Rights Frontiers for many years, since about 1993 or 4, when we started working together when I was director of the International Helsinki Federation for Human Rights. And since that time, I've been in close touch with Willy, and I've always admired his independence, his fidelity to human rights principles, his energy, and his friendliness and kindness to everybody he works with. Willy really is a treasure for the human rights community, and one of the reasons is that he's been around so long. I think Willy is one of the few people in the human rights community who's older than me. But what gives him his special insight into human rights is his history of working on behalf of religious freedom and human rights during the times of totalitarianism behind the Iron Curtain. And he really understands totalitarianism from his immediate experience. And that's in today's environment, this is very valuable, because once again we are facing threats to freedom from basically totalitarian forces. And that's why his work and the work of Human Rights Frontiers is just as important now, and maybe more important than it was when they started decades ago. And so once again, I want to send my best wishes and congratulations. Thank you very much.
I'd like to read out from Professor Max Bernhardt from Bern University. He also cannot be with us, but he has some special greetings to Willy Fautré and to the organization. Dear Willy, it says, it is a true pleasure to convey my warmest congratulations, thanks, and best wishes for past decades and future times of cooperation. We have enjoyed so many opportunities to exchange thoughts and experiences, both joyful and sad, when observing and publishing unrighteous facts, and sometimes even overcoming this world's challenges and sufferings. I admire and appreciate your restless efforts to offer your help in many ways and places, and teaching and encouraging your assistants and younger students. I am looking forward to further occasions of meeting and working together. Your friend, Max.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we will have a...
Maybe we can try again. Because
Maybe.
I think there are subtitles, no, on there?
But it would be, yes, Professor Introvigne and also Aaron Rhodes,
Yes.
who also had a message, who is a university lecturer and former director of the International, a book this year entitled The Demise of Human Rights, How Politics Sabotage the Ideal of Freedom. Thank you for their support. Unfortunately, they cannot be here, and maybe we'll be able to listen to their messages in a little while. Until then, we will show you a PowerPoint presentation that provides an overview of how the world looked like 30 years ago. A short commented review of the cover pages of the first dozen of issues of the magazine in 1988 and 89.
But first...
But before we do that, I would like to ask Willy to come back.
It's done.
It's done. And I would like to ask him what was his motivation for human rights and for founding Human Rights Without Frontiers.
Yeah, so a long story, but I will cut short that story, of course. First, I would say that I've always been fascinated by Martin Luther King and by Gandhi because of their principle of non-violence that they have practiced during their whole life, and for the fights of human rights issues at their times. I would have liked to be a conscientious objector to military service, but the choice was very limited at the time. I should have gone to prison, which was not the best option that I wanted, or to go to a third world country, as we were saying at the time, and teach there for a couple of years, 3-4 years, without being paid. It was not an option either. So I was not very courageous. And I could not do as many did in European countries and elsewhere, to go to prison just because I was a conscientious objector in my soul, I would say. But the turning point of my commitment to human rights is a book that I received from one of my students when I was teaching at the time, a book by a Lutheran Romanian pastor called Richard von Brandt, who had written the book Tortured for Christ, and that moved me really, and I wrote to the people who had published that book. They were based in Paris, and I helped them with the translations, with writing articles and so on. So a non-violent fight for religious freedom and human rights. I just want to recall that at the time it was the Cold War, that there were two blocks in Europe, the Eastern Bloc, the Western Bloc, that we were under threat of the communist totalitarianism and the missiles of the USSR at the time, and I found that it was a good commitment at that time to try to fight for those who were for democracy in the USSR and the satellite countries, and it could fit into my agenda for non-violence as it was practiced by Martin Luther King and Gandhi, but much more safely on my side. And a few years later, then I was sent to the cabinet of the Minister of Education, and there I met like-minded people who were like me, members of Amnesty International, but wanted to do more than just writing and sending letters. So we had a sort of informal group of reflection. And at the time we were in contact with a German organization, the Internationale Gesellschaft für Menschenrechte, the International Society for Human Rights, that was specifically dealing with human rights in the Eastern Bloc in Europe. So I joined them. I made some missions for them, visiting dissidents in the USSR at the end of the 1980s, and then coming back, we decided to promote their work here in Brussels, and finally to create our own organization, which was and which is Human Rights Without Frontiers. But at that time it was in French. For about 10 years, everything that we published was in French. So the magazines that we published was Droits de l'Homme Sans Frontières. It's only about a decade later that we progressively moved to the English language, and now we stick to it, of course. Okay, good. So that was the first magazine, dated June 1988. We cannot see the date here, unfortunately. And I thought it was interesting to show the cover pages of some of those magazines from 1988, 1989, because it reflects quite well how the world was looking like at that time. So we had in June 1988 a summit between Gorbachev and Reagan. So as I said before, it was in a divided Europe, East and West threatening each other with all sorts of nuclear weapons. So that summit was not very successful, it was said at the time. But what was, for example, interesting when I read again that article is that when Reagan went to Moscow, he invited 100 dissidents to the US embassy in Moscow. It's absolutely amazing, and I didn't remember that at all. And so we didn't know at the time that 1 year and a half later the world would totally change with some unexpected events that nobody could have ever imagined. At the time there were about 300 political prisoners in the Soviet Union. And Gorbachev was in power, so glasnost, perestroika, was moving forward, but we never expected that it would be the end of the Soviet Union 18 months later. So next one. So that period, it's also the period where there were dictatorships in Central America, in Latin America in general. We had managed to get rid before of the dictatorships in Europe, in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal. And so progressively, we got rid of those dictatorships as well in Latin America. Not all of them, and there are still a few, Cuba, and now we have Venezuela, again, that is problematic. But at that time, the dictatorships were also associated with the disappearance of many opponents. And there was a resolution of the UN that had been sent to 9 governments asking for clarification about the disappearance of more than 1,000 people. Next one. Yeah. Yeah, so RDA, DDR, so East Germany, that does not exist anymore. You see how the world can change, how the maps of even of Europe can change in a few decades' time. At that time, so we had East Germany. Those who were living there were not allowed to come to West Germany, even to visit their families that had been separated by the Berlin Wall that had been built in 1961. And it is estimated that between 1948 and 1981, that several hundred civilians were killed when trying to cross the border, including those who tried in Berlin itself, trying to swim across the Spree River. And you can still see there the crosses of those people that have been preserved along the river, despite all the changes, the urbanistic changes in the region around the Bundestag. Yes, next one. So, Afrique du Sud, South Africa, it was also that period where we had that regime of apartheid that had been in place for so many years. And nobody would think that would disappear, but it disappeared. And Mandela, another non-violent fighter who spent 27 years in detention, was finally released in 1990 and became president of the country in 1994. Next one. Yes? Okay, yes. Yes, so that problem is not solved yet. But we hope that we are now on the right way to find a solution, despite the 2 strange leaders that are involved in this issue, Donald Trump and on the other side, Kim Jong-un. So it's through Pierre Rigolo, who is here, who is famous in Paris as an expert on North Korea and human rights in North Korea, that we got involved in the fight for South Korea, human rights in North Korea. So we hope that the solution will be found to make the peninsula peaceful and safe for everybody, and with improvements, mainly improvements for human rights in North Korea. But also in South Korea, you have hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses in prisons as conscientious objectors. Next one. Sakharov. Sakharov. Of course, we have the annual Sakharov Prize in Brussels at the European Parliament. But first, he was a Russian nuclear physicist, also a dissident, an activist for disarmament. He was for the withdrawal of the Russian troops from Afghanistan. But he was also a peace and human rights activist, and he got the Nobel Prize the Peace Nobel Prize in 1975, and he was thanked by the USSR by being sent to internal exile 5 years later, from 1980 to 1986. And then, yes, that time it was which month was it? December. Yeah, December. 1988, January 1989. So we were 9 months just before the collapse of the Soviet Union and all the satellite countries. Next one. Ceausescu. Yes, well-known Ceausescu in Belgium, because I remember there was, he was one of the worst dictators first on the European continent, although Georges Marchais in France, head of the Communist Party, liked to go and spend his vacations in Romania. But he had as a plan to destroy 8,000 villages and to put all those people living in the countryside in cities. And there was first a resolution of the European Parliament against that project, but also, you can go to the next one, This is what they call the systematization of the territory of the cities and the villages. But there was also a huge campaign in Belgium to save those Romanian villages. We are almost at the end. Next one. So that's May 1989. I think that we were feeling all the time that something would happen without knowing what exactly. But it's almost unconscious. La main tendue à l'autre Europe. So outreach, the policy of outreach to the USSR in this case. So we thought there might be some sort of rapprochement between the two parts of Europe that had been in conflict since the Second World War. And the last one. Lettre ouverte à Gorbachev. So Gorbachev, it was in June of 1989, so 4 or 5 months before the collapse of the Soviet Union. This magazine was published on the eve of his visit to the European Parliament in Strasbourg. And at the same time, there was a CSCE conference, human rights conference in Paris. And on that occasion, we published a very long open letter addressed to Gorbachev about his wish, at least that's what he was saying, his wish to build a common European house, and about peace and about the rule of law. Now, in August, so just a couple of months later, it's okay, in August, then we had a group of East Germans that went to Hungary, say, okay, let's spend some time there, there is an interesting event. And they decided that it would be nice to cross the border with Austria because the fence was damaged. They did. They crossed the border. The guards didn't shoot at them. And it was the end of the Eastern Bloc. Just that simple, unexpected, sudden event was the end of the Soviet Union, the end of the Warsaw Pact, the end of that part of Europe that had been under communist regime since the end of the Second World War. So, with a few months later, it was the Berlin Wall. I think many of us saw that on television. A great time. So it collapsed and dragged down in its fall the demise of communism. Nobody had predicted that such an event could happen. Maybe something will also happen on the Korean Peninsula that we cannot predict. Who knows? Who knows? But we must keep that. It's the unimaginable things can also happen. Okay, you may think these are all stories of a veteran of the Cold War that I am, that communism is dead, nothing to do with the present and the future. But why this historical reminder? Because personally, the main lessons that I draw from that period, from those events, is that all human beings, men and women around the world, simply aspire for peace, for freedom, for justice, for equal right, for happiness, for education, good education for their children, whatever the political system in which they live, whatever their religion, whatever their political ideas. And we are all people belonging to the same human family. The second point says we saw that most dictatorships in Latin America have finally disappeared, and the last ones will soon disappear. Also, that third point, the political regime based on apartheid that had been for so many years in place also disappeared. So this past, in fact, gives me some hope for the future. Our world is now facing other challenges, other threats, new forms of warfare, new forms of totalitarianism. This is the new reality. We cannot escape it. But I'm confident that one day all these problems will also disappear if we unite our efforts to combat them. And I hope that in 30 years, I will not be here, I can assure you, but if you are here, you will tell a story that, oh yes, 30 years ago, the first 2 decades of the second century, it was awful, the situation that we were living in, but all this will have disappeared, I'm sure about that. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Willy. It was a really excellent way of telling us what happened in the past 30 years and how much has changed, but how much things have stayed the same. And exactly what you said about how no matter where we look, we're all human beings and we probably all want the same thing.
Absolutely.
So there's no change in that regard.
Why should it each other?
Thank you for that. And now I would like to invite Leah to give us a presentation, followed by Elisa, on recent, current and future projects of the organization.
Thank you, Souza. Good evening, everyone. I have had the pleasure to work with Human Rights Without Frontiers over the past few years. The changes from when I have started have been incredible, even to now. We have strengthened our community, increased our amount of and reach of projects, and seen many successes in human rights around the world. Over the past 5 years, we have held almost 30 conferences at the European Parliament alone, on topics from human rights in North Korea, religious freedom in Russia, fair trials in Romania, and ethnic minorities in Azerbaijan. In 2013, we began our FORB prisoners database, in which we collect the legal details of FORB prisoners around the world. Since then, I did a lot of counting in the last few days. We have documented the legal cases of over 8,000 individuals in prison. In the past few years, we have traveled to over 20 countries for conferences and missions, including Cyprus, Kyrgyzstan, Morocco, the Philippines, South Korea, Tunisia, and the United States, just to name a few. We've additionally attended countless human rights consultations with the European External Action Services, with individual MEPs, European Parliament committees, and representatives from national parliaments, human rights councils, and as well as the OSCE. In the past 5 years, we have published a large amount of material on the issue of freedom of religion or belief. In summary, we have published 10 major reports on freedom of religion or belief, 10 papers, and approximately 150 articles, all addressing the issues surrounding FORB. We've also published reports on many other human rights issues. Over 25 major reports on human rights issues in the past 5 years, and approximately 120 articles, all addressing a range of human rights issues. The past few years, the HRWF team, including our board members and many consultants and experts around the world, have worked tirelessly to provide research materials and advocacy platforms for a wide range of human rights topics. And we have seen many positive results, but we also have quite a lot of work ahead of us.
Good evening, everyone. As my colleague just mentioned, we still have a lot of work ahead of us, and we are continuously developing research and exploring ideas to further our impact on human rights. Most recently, this has meant the development of 2 new programs, Women's Rights and Religion and Security in Religion, each of which Leah and I are leading. Within the Women's Rights and Religion program, we have just published our first report, which discusses women's rights within Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. You can find it outside on the table. Each chapter discusses a different theme: child marriage, FGM, public dress code, violence against women, and reproductive rights. Our Security in Religion program, which has just kicked off last month with a weekly newsletter, will look at themes that tie these 2 fields together. While still very early in its development, we hope to look at security issues with religious components. For example, religious preachers who are deported on the grounds of hate speech, or threatening security groups which claim to be religious but also advocate for violence, and so on. In the future, we hope to follow this trend and take our expertise in FORB and increasingly mix it with other urgent and pressing issues as they develop. We believe this is one of the best ways in which we contribute to the discussions and debates here in Brussels. Another topic we've covered has been examining and evaluating the human rights components of the European arrest warrant cases. Within this topic, we have looked at specific cases in which human rights components block the applicability of extradition. In addition, we have looked at larger national trends of certain countries which frequently abuse the European arrest warrant system. We hope to continue to strengthen this work with all of our partners. In the future, we will continue to work on an ad hoc basis picking up projects where we are needed the most. Most importantly, however, we wish to continue our partnerships and friendships with all of those in this room. You have all greatly contributed to our work and to human rights around the world. Without all of you, none of this would be possible. So on behalf of our team in the office, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the bar is open and there are a few things to eat as well. And there will be music in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much.